Thank you for being here today. Great to see you today, and welcome for the ITBBerlin Convention 2022. It's great to see you. Also, of course, join us for the conversation online with the hashtag ITBBerlin Convention. It's great to read your comments, your thoughts, and of course, your questions. And now we are heading into our next topic. And the question really remains, it's a hot question. How can you survive a CEO disaster? Let's listen and let's learn from the SEO catastrophes from the past. With us today is Kaspar Szymanski from Search Brothers. Welcome, Kaspar. Thanks for being here today, and the stage is yours.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here again after 3 years, I believe. Very warm welcome. My name is Kaspar Szymanski, and I used to work for Google Search, which is where a part of my expertise comes from. Of course, I'm not here to talk about myself or my expertise. I want to share with you. And the topic really is SEO disasters. Now, surviving SEO disasters, in fact. We're going to be talking about 3 real-life cases that I'm at liberty to discuss. And the idea behind is to get across as much information as possible, of course, address your questions at the very end, but also to convey information that will help you to not experience a disaster to begin with. Let's dive right in with the most important question in any case. Why? Why should we care? Why should we care about not experiencing an SEO disaster with our website? And the reason is very simple. Well, we don't want to be in a situation that the website isn't visible in Google search results, in Google organic search. Therefore, let's plunge right in. Just as a heads up, we will not embarrass anyone, of course, so we won't be sharing the actual brands, but you'll get an idea where these sites come from. The first case, I like to refer to it as premium retail website, and that's their progression, or rather digression, in terms of how visible they used to be in Google search. You see 3 bubbles here in this graph, and well, the first one indicates a step they have taken, the subsequent one, a worse step yet, and the third one is the step that really, well, that was the coup de grace for the website, so to say. What happened? Premium retail website was in the business of selling watches, selling jewelry, and they were doing rather really well. So far, so good. The one thing that was a little bit undermined was the website, the domain, in fact. It was a little bit longish and too long for their liking. Now, they came across the opportunity to purchase another shorter domain, which seemed to be more appealing, more memorable. They did just that. Next thing that happened is they did a domain migration. Say they moved the context of one website of, say, let's call that domain A to the new domain, domain B. What happened subsequently for all search engines, but of course we are most interested in what Google does, is a recrawl, meaning the website, the new website has to be crawled again, has to be discovered again by Googlebot and other bots, and that process does take time. Unfortunately, what has not been done in preparation, the due diligence if you want, there was no audit conducted. And by conducting an audit, we're really talking about checking what are the shortcomings of a website, both on and off page, in terms of technical solutions, in terms of the content on page. That was unfortunately neglected. That was a major problem, and that was going to haunt them. They also failed to introduce redirects, and they had a broad redirect. So everything that used to exist on website A, say on website A, index.html was just transferred, 301 transferred to website B, calling that index.html. There was really no consideration with regard to, do those redirects make sense? Are they going to work for us? Are they going to work against us? Because there was no audit, because those redirects were introduced, all legacy content was transferred from the old site to the new site with no regard whether it was going to be desirable to begin with or not. Now, That was really an issue because there was a lot of sold out content. And sold out content is a major issue for websites. Essentially, if you happen to have content, let's call that a piece of a watch that is sold out, or maybe a travel opportunity that is sold out, unavailable. If that is transferred to the new domain, that of course constitutes a very bad user experience because users who happen to end up on that landing page don't like it very much. Consequently, search engines don't like that either. And that was, of course, contributing to the signals, to the overall signals of the website, both on and off page, becoming worse and worse, progressively really decreasing in quality. Now, the first thing happened that really triggers the whole situation. The new website was, however, disputed. And because that new website was disputed, the new domain was disputed, the legal team took the unprecedented step of saying, you know what, we can't have it. The new domain that we just acquired, the new domain that we just moved towards, we can't really use that. So what did they do? They migrated yet again. Any migration under the best of circumstances is a challenge. It's always a challenge because there is fluctuations. The website has to be recrawled. Having two migrations to two different websites in short succession is the recipe for, well, maybe not disaster, but most definitely the recipe for challenges, for additional problems, because they have to be recrawled. And every successive recrawl obviously takes longer yet. Now, the problem was, once again, due diligence was completely neglected, and the new domain, the third domain that was ultimately taken for the second migration, was an aftermarket domain. Nobody really bothered to check whether there was a penalty in place. And by penalty, I'm referring to a Google penalty that was lingering because that old domain, that used domain, has to be in violation with Google Webmaster Guidelines. That, of course, held that domain and that new website back additionally. Now things started to spiral out of control and completely. What happened was, because the website was to reflect the actual brick-and-mortar business, which was a real business, an actual brand, the decision was taken to decentralize the management of bits and pieces of the website to reflect more closely how the business operated. So the Swiss part of the operation would take over the .ch subdomain, and the UK part of the website would be operating on UK website. Everybody was essentially doing whatever they wanted. Everybody was at liberty to take decisions on their own and introduce changes they considered the best course of action. Little surprise there, those teams did not like each other very much, and because there was no central authority, strife was imminent. Essentially, everybody used the technology they decided that was best for them. This is literally how the website looked like. Everybody used their own CMS. Nobody really cared much for performance. And ultimately, the combination of all these factors together was the recipe for a total disaster. A complete nosedive that you have seen in the initial slide. And it was really a situation where there was a lot of work that had to be done in order to avert the worst-case scenario. The worst-case scenario actually was that the website stopped being visible. The business still boomed offline, but in a way, it used to be visible online. That stopped being really the case, and they lost all the organic visibility. They lost all the sales. The takeaways here. And this is self-serving, but this is something that has to be kept in mind all the time. Anybody operating a commercial website, anybody operating a business online that is supposed to be visible, has to audit, and has to audit regularly. Pretty much the same way that you would maybe bring your car for a checkup, for an annual checkup. A website has to be checked every year. An audit comes always first. The other point is that while democracy is the best principle yet to be invented by the humans, SEO is anything but a democratic process. It involves a lot of people. There's a lot of stakeholders. Everybody has to be on board, but there has to be but one decision-making entity. There has to be one person who's the central authority to make calls in order to prevent that kind of strife, in order to prevent that kind of situation where we have a lot of technology that doesn't really work together and that holds us back. The second case is, in my personal opinion, the most important one when we are talking about ITB, and the probably most representative one for our industry, for the travel industry. Let's call that website for a moment Journey Compare Heaven. What we're looking at is the graph that shows the volume of indexable landing pages and the total volume of landing pages. A spoiler alert, more is not better. So the green part is what the website would really want to have indexed. And the gray part is what they had indexed, and much, much more. What happened? We once again have a situation where the website did rather well. It was a platform that used to provide travel comparison for the interested target audience, and business was good. We are talking pre-2020 situation. Business was really good indeed until it was not. What had happened? In a situation where sales went really up constantly, the idea was conceived by the management that we can expand business. And how do we expand business? How do we get a bigger part of the cake? How do we expand our market share? Well, they were serving only so many languages. They were serving only so many markets. So what they did do is, instead of localizing content, they decided to translate the existing website into 5 other languages. There is a very big difference between localizing content, which serves the target audience, and really translating it, which serves very poorly both the website and the target audience. But that's what happened. That, of course, changed the volume of indexable landing pages by the factor of 5-fold overnight. What we're seeing here is representative for this unstamped flow of additional landing pages. The website grew in size overnight quite considerably. That in itself may have been a challenge, but wouldn't necessarily trigger a very negative reaction in organic search, except something else was done, and that was much more challenging yet. Filtering was opened for indexation. What does that mean? Any kind of product and any kind of variation of the product was now available for search engines to see, to index, and to provide as a landing page. Meaning the volume of indexable pages now completely went overboard. It was a complete explosion in terms of how many landing pages were there in existence. A real tidal wave came across. That is something that does impact the crawl budget, but that was the least of the problems at that point in time because they didn't have canonicals. Now, in search engines, you can identify which website is the good one if you happen to have a lot of landing pages that seem to be more or less the same. They did not have canonicals. They did not introduce canonicals, which is a cardinal mistake to do in terms of SEO. The consequence of that was cannibalization. They happened then to have an awful lot of landing pages but that were either identical or almost identical, and they were competing against each other in Google search rather than having one dedicated landing page on any given topic. That was very, very bad. What also did happen is, because there was an awful lot of landing pages where for the specific language there was no content, they happened to have a lot of lean content pages. Landing pages that essentially looked like this slide. There was not much for the user to do. Well, except if users ended up on those landing pages because they happened to encounter them in Google search, their experience was very poor. And for search engines, user experience is very important. Search engines want to make sure that their users are happy. So if users indicate with their behavior because they return to Google search, they look for something else, they refine the query, if they indicate to Google and other search engines that experience wasn't good, that is a red flag. That is very unfortunate. Something else came on top, and this is very important because this is a takeaway for everybody who's listening. They did not record their server logs. Every time a search engine tries to crawl, a crawler tries to fetch a website, a log is generated, and that information has great value if it's aggregated over time. Unfortunately, Journey Makes Happy, Journey Compare Heaven, unfortunately did not record those logs, so they did not have that treasure trove of data when they really needed it. There is a silver lining in the case of this case, in this instance, because they were able to recover. And I want to say that straight away. There is no situation where an SEO disaster cannot be mitigated. Every SEO disaster, even the worst penalty, can be lifted. But the road at time, as in this case, is quite a long one, which is, of course, something we want to prevent from happening. And there is, of course, a couple of takeaways. And one I already kind of mentioned. Saving server logs is something that, of the people that are currently listening to us, 99% do not do. Even the largest companies do not do that. And there is a number of arguments that people bring forward why it shouldn't be done. There is the cost argument, there is a legal argument. None of really holds up if compared against what is the case. Can we preserve server logs? Yes, it's our good right to do so. If we do that, we can utilize them over a period of time, and it's not that costly anymore either. So highly recommended. Go ahead. If you run a large website, if you operate a large website, go ahead and save and preserve your server logs, at least for 12 months, but preferably longer than that. Focus. Less is more. Fewer landing pages that are more optimized tend to do better. The signals are much improved. They are much more focused on the one thing that the website represents, what the website stands for. Therefore, fewer landing pages that are more optimized is the better strategy. And last but not least, there is one case which I want to share with you today, and that's Medicine Makes Happy, a straightforward case of overreaching. What we're looking at is the volume of backlinks that the website happened to have. Backlinks is, of course, something that can work quite well for us, except if Google deems them to be against Google Webmaster Guidelines, to be artificially created, then it does not. What happened? Medicine Makes Happy did rather really well. And unlike the other examples, they really wanted to have just a bigger cut of the market. They wanted, in a way, they wanted to have the cake and eat it too. They did already have legacy. And by legacy, I'm referring to the backlink profile. They have been building links for quite considerable time. So there were already backlinks that Google would clearly frown upon, and they were aware of that. Their link building wasn't really at a high volume, as you could see initially in this graph that we have seen. They were building a little bit of backlinks every month, but it really didn't go overboard. The management thought, well, we're kindling with fire here, but it's working so well. Let's do it a little bit more. So they decided to increase the pace. They decided it would be a good idea to not just build a little bit of PageRank passing links every month, but let's do it on a really large scale. That was, of course, kindling with the fire a little bit more. That was much riskier yet. The website was more visible, but of course it was also more visible to Google and Google scrutiny. Because that went well, they thought, you know what, let's go really overboard. Let's build a lot of links. We can do that very, very cheaply. The quality doesn't matter. And that's what happened. That completely went out the window. Of course, they did burn themselves because they built so many backlinks that this was identified as a black hat technique, as a spam technique, something that Google does frown upon, and something that Google does actually penalize for. Yes, websites can be penalized within Google if they do not play by Google rules. A penalty was issued. Unfortunately for the website, they were actually quite adept and they reacted very swiftly. The next step that happened is that they cleaned up their backlink profile. They did submit a disavow file in order to disassociate the website with those backlinks, and they did submit a compelling reconsideration request. Very important in this instance is that the website did have a unique selling proposition. It was not one of those websites where you really have to look hard to find something useful. It was a decent website, a real brand, and they did their due diligence. They did clean up the backlink profile, and the reconsideration request was granted. A last couple takeaways before we take on your questions. When you build links, and I always keep saying building links is an important part of any rounded SEO strategy, please build them for traffic, not for PageRank purposes. Anything else is dangerous and might go really south. Any penalty can be lifted. Whether that's a penalty that has been applied because of link building or because of poor content or because of something else completely, any Google penalty can be lifted. It does not have to be the end. In fact, it can actually be the beginning of a beautiful new start. Any SEO disaster is really an opportunity to grow. Frequently, organizations are hesitant to take action, to change in a radical way, maybe to change technology or their strategies. The moment an SEO disaster strikes, obviously that's not a desirable situation, but the moment it does happen, it is an opportunity to actually change the paradigm, to improve the website, to improve SEO signals, and to go up and look for new highs and new strengths in organic Google search going forward. I've been trying to go as fast as possible, so we still have about at least 5 minutes to discuss questions if we have any.
Thank you very much, Kaspar Szymanski, for, of course, your outlines and your insights into SEO catastrophes. Ladies and gentlemen, dear ITB family, now it's open for your questions. So shoot along your questions, your thoughts, your comments. I'm going to read the questions to Kaspar, and then we're going to find answers. He will find answers. Thank you so much, Kaspar, for being here today in the studio. Let's have a look, hey, if the Slido is actually filled up already, the inbox of Slido with questions.
Absolutely.
And I do see already questions coming in. Interesting first question. How would you measure the SEO success? Could you give us an insight on that?
I suppose if the website's visibility in organic Google search exceeds my wildest expectations, that would be rather successful. But there is, of course, a number of KPIs. It's a very broad question, and thanks for bringing that up. I think it's a very valid question. A couple of KPIs, key performance indicators in terms of SEO, can be around the performance. How fast does my website load? Does it load faster for users and search engines alike than the next best competitor's website? That's a very good KPI. But really, SEO success down the line is to be as visible as one can be. And generally, in my experience, every website can be improved, both on a technical level, but also on the content level. And of course, there is always the off-page aspect where backlinks can not just be improved, but the website can disassociate itself from the legacies that every large website aggregates over time. So SEO success, I would say avert any failures, of course, any major disasters, and constantly be visible for relevant queries to convert.
Great, thank you, Kaspar. Let's have a look into the second question. What are the most important Google ranking factors in your opinion?
I love that question. Thanks. There's one which I consider absolutely critical, and that is a unique selling proposition. It's not a matter of opinion. It is something that Google's been saying time and again, and even quite recently, John Mueller, a former peer of mine, mentioned that on Twitter. It's not just in theory, but real in fact that every landing page does provide something not readily available elsewhere. We have to provide within our desirable landing pages, within the parts of the website that we consider important for ranking, something that is of value. It can be content, it can be data, it can be a combination thereof. It can be the biggest community, the fastest service. It really depends on what we are selling. But that is the critical one element which must be present in order to be successful in the long term. And SEO is complex. There is an awful lot of other factors that play a role. Obviously, there's performance. If there are several sites that are roughly the same, typically Google favors the fastest one because they want to make sure that the user experience is great. There are other factors still. There are technical aspects. There are content factors. I could be going for a long time, but if we have to focus on just one and only factor, I'm saying unique selling proposition. Have that within your product, and then talk about it. Make sure it's understood by search engines and users alike.
You were talking about SEO catastrophes and SEO disasters. So can you give us also signals or indications to stop this catastrophe into rolling or from rolling before, before the explosion comes actually up? Are there some indications or signals that you can share with us?
Certainly. There are indicators when it's almost too late. For instance, if there is a completely overboard growth in terms of backlinks that we seem not to know where they're coming from. And there can be perfectly legitimate reasons for those links to be in existence. But chances are that these are not the kind of links that we want to be associated with. There can be a sharp increase in the volume of landing pages that we don't really seem to have the desire to be in place, as in, for instance, filtering. Or maybe there are so-called soft 404s, landing pages that return a 200 OK response, but in fact, there is no product. The product is sold out. So these can be all very good early indicators, early warning signs. And of course, there is Google Webmaster Tools, Google Search Console nowadays, and there is messaging happening there as well. It can be messages that indicate issues. It can be messages that outline a penalty. At that point, it's almost too late, but again, it can be fixed. These are just a few of those
Kaspar.
warnings.
Let's have a look into the questions. Where can we find some guidelines online as those mentioned by you today? Do you have any tips and tricks?
I will be perfectly happy to share them on Twitter, I'm afraid, because there is a lot. One of the channels that I favor quite a lot is Search Engine Land and Search Engine Journal. Both great channels. I publish there myself. And I'll be happy to share a couple of those best practice guides on Twitter today.
Please use the hashtag ITBBerlin convention.
I will do just
everybody
that.
knows it and find it. Thank you, Kaspar. And last question, what is the best way to learn SEO for beginners?
There is an SEO guide from Google, and that is the foundation. This is the one document that you should embrace, read, and try and test. This is a very good starting point, but SEO is complex. You will never stop learning. This is what makes this industry so exciting.